Welcome to the dark side of the female psyche with Michael Tsarion. Here we will be delving deeply into those dark corners of psychology that few have the courage to acknowledge, the evil that exists within the female psyche. This series aims to offer you viable solutions, resources, and potent insights that can aid you in your rehabilitation and empowerment. But be forewarned, this is a series not for the faint of heart, nor is it for the easily triggered. Rather, it is only for those courageous women who realize the severity of the hour humanity is in. This means if you're going to listen to this series, you need to be ready to take self-ownership over your reactions and your responses. Because while women do hold the power to change the world, the state and quality of that change will invariably be influenced by how well a woman knows her own psyche, how beautiful, honorable, and dignified that woman chooses to become. If you are a woman who is choosing to willfully evolve, if you are a woman who sincerely desires to master yourself, your mind, and your behavior, then the information shared throughout this series will serve you well. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Dark Side of the Female Psyche, here with Michael. And this week's episode is Erotic Masquerade. And I'm so curious to see where you go this week, Michael. So please go right ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. It's nice to be back. I really appreciate this. Well, of course, we'll just carry on. But I thought that we had made some remarks about homosexuality last time, with the promise that we may dig a little deeper into that. And I think this is the time. And hopefully, if it goes well, then even next time we meet, we can carry on this particular. So it'll be a follow-on next time.
Sounds good.
Because, of course, obviously, you have to fit it all in. It's all got to make sense. This is the whole thing of why it's taken even us to do multiple episodes. And even through my work with Unslaved, it's lengthy to unpack it all. One is because I really sincerely mean that we are in an anti-psychological society. So when you're opening a new door and you know that mostly 95% of the population doesn't know what you're talking about, you do have to go step by step, I think, which is what we've been doing. So I'm very satisfied. But then there's always this larger cultural, even historical perspective, as we've seen through our programs, that sometimes comes to bear more than people would even realize. Things like racial memory and atavism and, archetypes, the Jungian archetype question. And I think we've really done great on that in the past, touching on that, even getting into the subject of the malignant version of that. So, hopefully our members will have listened to those and they will take time to digest it, because that's what it does. That it takes time to consolidate. But we have some opening slides before we get to the idea of the homosexuality, just to sort of orient us again as to where we're kind of going, a little bit of the background. So maybe if you read the first one, we can kick it off from there.
Here we have a quote from Irvin Yalom. He says, Freud, for example, spoke of the disproportionately severe and enduring damage to the ego caused by massive trauma early in life, and cited by way of illustration an experiment in biology which demonstrated the catastrophic effects on an adult organism caused by the tiny prick of a needle into the embryo at the very beginning of its development.
So look at that. It starts very early on. It's true that Freud did not go that deep into this very prenatal period, but he did make statements about it, if you read closely. It's more Otto Rank, his secretary for 22 years, who, in their personal conversations and what have you, took this up. And he wrote a book called The Trauma of Birth, which is one of the great masterpieces. It really is. And Freud endorsed it to a degree. It was only when Rank, and not just him, but some of the others, started to a little bit move away from Freud's original premise, regarding sexuality and the primacy of sexuality. This was the cause of a major split We're certainly not going to get into all of it. It's irrelevant to that, to what we're talking about. But Freud's ideas were so fertile that it allowed his 10, 12 closest members of this Viennese psychoanalytical circle to feel inspired enough to go their own ways in many cases. Some of it caused breakup. Some of them have nervous breakdowns, like Otto Rank he did,
Oh,
and Carl Jung had a nervous breakdown. There was a lot of dynamics involved as they went through these processes of separating from Freud. But Freud was always very, very genteel. There was no boot stamping. There was no uh, authoritarianism. This is what feminists have spread
yeah.
because they'll hate anyone that's white and conservative and male and European. They're so scurrilous, these people, that they've just, and also we're talking about the American feminist who found out that Freud wasn't really welcomed. And on the reverse side, Freud didn't like America. There's actually a paper out there somewhere that you can find called Why Freud Hated America. Now, I don't think he hated America, right? But he didn't like it when he visited. He got really ill and all these neurotic syndromes came up. So it wasn't a love affair. For Carl Jung, it was. Now, the feminists got hold of this and they went, great, right? We know that most people haven't even lifted a book on Freud and they know nothing about him. So we can scandalize him, marginalize him.
Mm.
So this was one of their orientations. There's no love lost, you know what I mean? We have done a podcast on Enslaved called The Conspiracy Against Freud. And that is a very, very good one because it lays to rest a lot of these myths regarding Freud himself. A very crucial one. And I've been studying this all my life, so I thought, okay, we can do one or two podcasts on Enslaved about this, dealing with his biography. And this is, of course, not to exonerate him, not to play down some of the mistakes that he obviously had made in the past. No. Those have to be expressed properly so that then you can see how they evolved and how these other great names around him were able to take what he had and develop it, in really positive ways so that there's a nice balance. But you don't expect perfection from an entrepreneur, from somebody who is a genius type. That's not his job. His job is to come up with the great ideas and then leave it to other people to massage it, and publicize it and what have you. There's a great deal of speculation involved in the mind of a great thinker, as his mind darts here and darts there. And this is particularly true if he's a pioneer, which Freud was. But here he's already on top of pediatrics. Look what he's actually saying there. And this, of course, is to indict the profession. It's to indict the doctors, telling mothers, all right, bend over, here we go, or pull up your dress, we're going to stab your child with a needle. And it's a partial indictment of mothers who go for it, who have lost their own. Did our forebears do that for thousands of years when people were giving birth? Did they lend themselves to this? Of course not. So Freud is already on to these aberrations. And this is what he's talking about. And he's acknowledging the fact that there's trauma even in the prenatal period. He was aware of it. And I think this then became very important. But because of the period that we're talking about, where the father's presence isn't quite as strong, the feminists wanted to sort of, let's not talk about that on the whole. I mean, Julia Kristeva did, Barbara Creed, people I've covered on Enslaved, they did. But that's only two out of how many countless thousands who wanted to immediately, shift forward in the process to get to where the father and the male's role is a little bit more dominant, so then they can begin with their chicanery. But can we move on? Read the next one too.
The belief that all parents passionately love their children and would like nothing better than to be able to take care of them is a modern fiction and self-delusion. A quote from Thomas Szasz.
Look at that, straight up. And Thomas Szasz was one of the great psychologists. He's often thought of as an anti-psychologist, one of those who had deep criticisms of psychiatry and psychology, and he really did. He wrote over about 30 books hammering, right? Psychiatry particularly. He was no lover of Freud, and he was a really remarkable person. And I recommend that people get his books. He wrote one called Schizophrenia. He wrote one called The Myth of Mental Illness
Mm.
and The Manufacture of Madness. Those three are essential reading. And he's one of these great forgotten geniuses. He was a libertarian. He was into Ayn Rand, and he was a remarkable man who exposed the chicanery of the entire medical complex. We need his type today. There's no one's ever matched him, by the way. His master was Karl Kraus, the German philosopher, writer, thinker, critic, who also was one of the first to lampoon psychology and psychoanalysis, claiming that it was the disease of which it pretended to be the cure. That was his famous phrase.
Mm.
That it was the disease of which it pretended to be the cure. Yeah, great. So we don't have time here to explore this position, but I've done so in articles on my website, and we've certainly done plenty of it on Enslaved. Just again, fill that in. Not to say, as they do, that there's no need for psychology, not to go that far, and that's only because we're in a desperate state. You and I have talked about that before. Given the desperate state we're in, even a razor blade to a drowning man, you can clutch it. So there's pros and cons to that. But Thomas Szasz is highly recommended, and he takes it for granted that this masquerade, as we're talking about today, is already there in the pretenses of the parental constellation. But let's go on.
Any experienced psychotherapist knows that unloving parents abound, and that the vast majority of such parents maintain at least some degree of a loving pretense. Scott Peck, People of the Lie.
See, again, the same thing. And Dr. Scott Peck wrote 3, maybe even 4 books under the heading of this, The Road Less Traveled and People of the Lie. You see, and he was a top best-selling psychologist in one of those few moments in American history where psychology did sort of peak, thanks to the publishers, thanks to publicity. There was a period. But then there's been several small periods. And during the 90s, Dr. Scott Peck was popular. And it's a good thing because his books are really well worth reading. And he is, again, chiming in, just giving you some, evidence that when I speak, I'm not just bringing this out of the air, it's not just a personal perspectives here. The literature of pediatrics and psychology of children, does represent this. Let's read on.
Continuing with Scott Peck and People of the Lie, he says, whenever a child is brought for psychiatric treatment, it is customary to refer to her or him as the, quote, identified patient. By this term, we psychotherapists mean that the parents have labeled the child as the patient, namely, someone who has something wrong and is in need of treatment. More often than not, as we proceed with the evaluation of the problem, we discover that the source of the problem lies not in the child, but rather in his or her parents, family, school, or society. We usually find that the child is not as sick as its parents.
Now, that's very, very Thomas Szasz-like. So Peck might have been reading Thomas Szasz here because that is almost in a nutshell. In The Manufacturing of Madness and his other works, this is where Thomas Szasz comes in to show basically, what I can refer to as adultism gone wild.
Mm.
And luckily, he was so an impressive of a thinker and a speaker when he spoke to audiences, Thomas Szasz, and these were pediatricians, these were medical people. He had them in fits of laughter and just showing up their own chicanery, showing up their own lunacy. They couldn't help but applaud and hide their tails between their legs. He was a genius, right? A genius. And no knowledge of psychology, psychiatry can really be had without taking on board what he and Karl Kraus and even Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous French philosopher, existential philosopher. These are the 3 major critics. There were others, but these are the 3 big critics of psychoanalysis. So I always like to mention their work because you get those who are very, very in favor, of the psychoanalytical, Then you get their extreme opposition, and then you get these types in the middle, like your Erich Fromm's and others. I want to sketch that in. I want people to know that it's not just one way, or that I'm just committed to one way, because when I talk about these things, it seems to people that I am very focused and committed. That's just the way it comes across. But see, in my own life, I've made sure to balance it out by looking at the critiques. And we certainly need to do it because, you see, the psyche itself has been hijacked by these neurologists. So you need the middle people who have that sort of unbiased perspective, very, very brilliant commentators. And you've got the advocates on one side, and then you've got the critics on the other. In subjects of importance, you need all those perspectives. You really, really do. You need to take the time. So I like to mention that. But let's move on.
This quote is from Alice Miller from her book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, The Search for the True Self. Child abuse is still sanctioned, indeed held in high regard in our society as long as it is defined as child rearing. It is a tragic fact that parents beat their children in order to escape the emotions from how they were treated by their own parents.
Yeah, she's just speaking there about the generational aspect, which is important too, of course. But I put that in because, you see, the child who's being abused, whether it's physical abuse or mental or emotional, has no clue about the generational thing going on. The parent does. But the child doesn't know, oh, you're treating me like this because you were treated this way by your parents. Because the grandparents are usually really, really, agreeable to their grandchildren. So the grandchild is not probably going to know just how bestial the grandfather or the grandmother was to their kids, meaning my parents. I'm not going to know that, am I? I'm not really going to sense it. I might not even be told because of this constellation, the chicanery that's involved. But the parent knows damn well. So the parent is going through a masquerade. The parent is still breeding a child so it can please and appease possibly a very tyrannical and evil parent. I did what you want. I know you want grandchildren. I've given you one. So these psychologists are not wrong. What do you think this is? Altar of sacrifice? And then you don't tell your newborn child at any given point of its life as it moves into infancy and adolescence that these are bestial people. I was really, really abused by my mom and dad. I don't, explain the dynamics. So the young child lives in a bubble of falsehood for which it's completely innocent. You are the guilty one. You're not explaining it for whatever reason. You're not unpacking it for the child. You're just letting this masquerade take place. You go to Granny's and she feeds you with cakes. A Granda slips you a tenner, before you leave, pretends to be really concerned. Is everything all right, son? Is everything all right? We're looking after you. How's that big brute treating you? What? Just unbelievable. So the child grows up, thinking, Granda, what is it? Gran and Grandad are wonderful. At the very most, a parent might, admit, oh, well, we were in poverty. We lived 6 to a house. It was awful. Or in an extreme case, they might admit that there's been delinquency or mental illness in the family. Yeah, it's not that they won't tell you certain things, but they're not going to dig deep. They're not going to tell you just, oh my God, mom's going to admit to you, her child, how much matrophobia she's drenched in, or how much rage daddy has, the way he was treated by his parents and even grandparents and all of this. This generational point needs to be mentioned as well. We haven't really gone into it that deeply, but it's a whole saga, because what it does is when you look at it, it illustrates this masquerade that's going on in the family constellation, I think. So Alice Miller's quite right there. Let's go on.
Sure. And I couldn't agree more. Being someone who uses evolutionary astrology to look generationally at the family dynamic, we can see it clearly, exactly what's going on and how it impacts from generation to generation to generation. It's undeniable, in my opinion.
Yes, it is. I get you. And there's slowly thinking that's coming out about that
Hmm.
now. Blossom. I don't think it's anything like good enough, perfect. But there's, there's a few people out there that look like they might be starting to get onto this now.
Yeah.
All I focus on is just the masquerade, the chicanery, and the lie mechanisms. Parents are editing. Parents are holding back.
Yeah.
Parents are having children for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Pacifying people that they actually hate within themselves, but just going through the roles and the domestic duties. It's really loathsome. It's not good. It's not good at all.
Yeah. All right. I'll read the next slide. This quote is from Nathaniel Branden's book, The Psychology of Self-Esteem. A child is vulnerable because he is not yet able to recognize clearly and unequivocally that his elders are irrational.
There's my point. This is where it becomes difficult because the child is innocent. He's accepting everything he's told. He's no idea that he's dealing with the raving, foaming, mad dog, crazy ass people. Doesn't know and will never know, not for a long, long time. And when he does know, then he becomes your sort of teenage dropout and delinquent. That's it. As simple as that. Don't even need to be a psychologist to know this. Yeah, let's go on.
And it looks like you have an observation on all of this here, Michael. This slide is titled Castration Fear. A classic example of this concerns the problem of castration and the trauma surrounding the threat of it. Seeing himself as the victim, the young boy is not aware that his mother's lack of a penis is perfectly natural. His mother is the source of the threat and subverts his rationality when it comes to sexuality. His fear of the mother is bound, therefore, to be greater than that of a young girl.
Yes, very important thing to point out there. We have talked about it before, but this is added now again to remind people where we're kind of at here. When the mother's dominion is there, but then this father figure appears. And this is especially, of course, true in the Victorian era and what have you. We acknowledge that. But nevertheless, it's a fact that what is perfectly natural scares the young child. But because the girl has nothing to lose, she's like her mother, the fear is almost non-existent.
Mm.
Where the castration, it's not even a fear, it's more of an anxiety. Let's be more specific. So the male child is the one who gets this immediate dollop of anxiety, persistent anxiety. It affects how he sees his father, possibly the mother's comments, and whatever the constellation is. He'll see the father as the castrator, which then, of course, tells him that the mother must have done something to deserve this kind of punishment. You see, the mind is going off into the world of Stephen King. You're already polluted and made morbid by all of this, right? It's a horror story. And because the parents don't explain anything properly, right? The child's imagination is allowed to run wild. Now, later we're going to be talking about homosexuality, so just bear in mind we're leading up to something here. But the point to be made here is that the castration fear or anxiety is mostly felt in boys, not girls. And when you break it down, like I've done, and show you that castration is not really only to be understood as a physical fear of the loss of a male member, but is a synonym for this arresting, right, regressive action through the 5 stages, right up to the age of 7. Those are all acts of castration. We see again that it's the boy who has to endure it. For the girl, it's much less. Doesn't mean that there's not trauma involved with a girl. We've spoken about that endlessly. But the boy has this more definite anxiety. Now, when it comes to the girl, remember we said her sexuality is being messed up as well. But it's not arrestation. You're not being arrested like the boy is. You're not being castrated. You're being goaded to use your sexuality in a negative way. Remember, we talked about this.
Yeah.
Especially if you're pretty. And especially if the mother is envious of your youth and your beauty. So it's bad both ways. But because so few feminists point this out, that's why I go to extra lengths, to point this out. So you've got these factors as well, all lurking in the background. And these fears will then have a great deal to do with how these parental imagos come across. There's differences then, between a boy's vision of his parents and a girl's vision of his parents, which by 6 and 7 years old is going to become more fixed, more reified when it comes to then the orientation and function of the superego. But let's go on.
According to the psychoanalytically trained historian Peter Gay, Freud believed that virtually all sentiments of love are ambivalent, virtually all contain elements of rage and hostility. Carl Goldberg, The Evil We Do.
So again, just making sure that people know this is in the literature, that the childhood rage and the childhood anxiety are the two conditions that the superego comes online to deal with. Has an etiology, you see, has a purpose. So it's the master of all coping mechanisms. And you can't know what life is, what the whole of reality is, depends on understanding this construction of the superego and how it then becomes an ersatz moral center. Neurologists, psychologists don't talk about this. It's pathetic. Just let me at them, right? I'd burn them out. Because you're a dual being. You have the moral center of the conscience, which is primary, but then the development of the superego is the development of a counterfeit moral center, which is going to be there through the whole of your life. It's going to be the way that you navigate your life. But you're not up at the captain's, booth to navigate the ship, where you should be, in this more imperial position, listening to the conscience. You're going to take on life's challenges using this grossly inferior moral center. And then you wonder later on when you're, going through midlife crisis, or even earlier than that, when you're going through your Saturn returns or whatever it might be, that there's a state of unimaginable meltdown. I mean, this is a Laurel and Hardy jalopy that you're driving, right? Instead of the limousine that you should own. But
Yeah.
let's go on.
And we have some observations here from you, Michael. This rage manifests in two classic ways, masochism and sadism. Both are indicative of what Freud referred to as the discontent, who secretly resents his occupancy of reality, the solar world. The former manifests in one who feels inherently weak and unable to master the challenges of reality, while the latter manifests in one who wishes to devour and destroy that which impedes his will and violates his necrophilous will.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the masochism and sadism.
Mm-hmm.
We've just done a long series on Unslaved, Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, which now I think is about 5 episodes. So these are a reference to that, which in which we go into in excruciating detail on the podcast, right? But these are two types again. These are the discontents who don't belong in the world. So this is not a subculture. This is almost everyone you know. Just to make that clear. Masquerade. Now the masochistic person goes, just push me around. I don't have the libido. I know that. All of these things around me are way more important than me. They want to be here. I don't. I can't handle it. So just push me about. Just tell me what to do. Can you just order me? Because I have no clue. I've got no map. I don't know what you know. You're so efficient. You guys are you're proper and adjusted. I'm not. I get through. Okay, I can handle my job, but I really need medication. I really don't like it. I'm in the cold. I'm always depressed. Right? I don't feel at home here. It's really difficult for me to move things around and, deal with the telephone and deal with my job responsibilities. It's all overwhelming. I'm crushed by reality. I'm crushed by all these things around me, these lampposts and animals and stuff. Oh, reality. It's horrible. I'm not up to it. And the sadist goes, I'm the same, mate. I don't want to be here. I don't even know how I got here. I just beamed down. I fucking hate it. So I'm going to push back. You see, because you got your willpower. The masochist's willpower is crushed early, probably because of some parental thing going on, right?
Yeah.
Or just some sort of constitutional weakness.
Yeah.
But remember, and most people, look at kids. They got a pretty strong willpower. So the sadist is just one more step above that. Goes, I'm going to use this tool. I'm going to crush and break the things that are in my way. I don't like them. I don't want to be here either. I'm not fit for this place. I didn't ask to be part of it. So watch me do graffiti. Watch me steal from people's lockers. Right? Watch me piss on the furniture. Big. Watch me break into people. Watch me nick things in the locker rooms. Right? Let me go and bully. Let me go and beat up people. Let me go and rape chicks. I know why I'm doing it. You can't cure me. This is your world, mate. You forced me in here. Well, I'm not going to be a happy camper. And, the sadist may never strike out at somebody. It may be just in his sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
It may be in snide remarks. Look at these stepmothers. Look at these hectoring crones, right? To a poor son who can never live up to the standard, or a daughter who has to just always be cowed, always be mocked, always be put down. Just this caustic tongue. Try living in fucking Ireland, right? Oh, Jesus. These Catholics. Try living in Mexico. What the fuck? Right? One disgusting, malignant crone can destroy a whole family with her hectoring and her backbiting and her, gossip. Can cause generations of feuding in a family. One woman, one old bitch, driving everybody to despair. You see, the sadism comes out in many, many forms, not just the classic. But I think that it's right to understand this because, as I said before, in the literature, for people who do have no idea what we're talking about, but are trying to become PhDs and all, they're always telling you that they can't explain masochism.
Mm.
It's very poor. And when you read books on it, they usually skip over it or come up with some lunatic ideas. They don't explain it as we're doing here. Because it goes against, right, the Darwinian rubric, the common materialistic rubric that man is here for pleasure. Right? The pleasure lies at the bottom. It's the bottom drive in all we do, seeking pleasure. You even had schools in Greece, like the hedonists and others, that believed entirely in this. Whole schools of philosophers that believed that the seeking, the Epicureans, for instance, right, that the search for pleasure is the ultimate meaning in life.
Yeah.
And it took until Sigmund Freud's time to go, I don't fucking think so. I don't think so. There is the sadomasochism. There are these other syndromes that fly in the face of that. And finally, it took until the 20th century, before people stopped in time and went, oh yeah, look, I think you're right. Yeah, I don't think that one really works. There's still materialists teaching it in schools today. They simply will not, accept this, even though they see so much suffering in the world. It's just a completely redundant, incongruous theory that dominated our planet for thousands and thousands of years. This idea that seeking pleasure is the bottom line. It took psychoanalysis to come along to shatter that illusion. But unfortunately, many people still can't get their minds around it. So it remains a problem. But I condense it simply in this way, based on Freud's last book. Very strong ground, very strong to look at it this way. But the trouble is why people can't accept it is because it's most of the human race. This is not a subcategory of mentally deficient people.
Exactly.
This is most of the people you meet are discontents. They don't belong here. They don't want to be here. Inwardly, of course, secretly, unconsciously. And so the entire basis of their existence is a coping mechanism to different degrees. And the 4 neurotic types that we've spoken about before, they're part of it, right? Those are all 4 different coping mechanisms, and pretty much all other forms of pathology. Schizophrenia is a coping mechanism to this. I don't want to be here. Multiple personality disorder. Okay, and on ADHD, you know, I don't know, the whole shebang.
Yep.
Is all based in this. I don't want to be here, but there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
Except into madness. Except into the dark corners of the interior. And people do, right? I'm climbing into my box in the corner of the room, and I'm closing the lid. Fuck off. You see, that's it. Life doesn't offer you any opportunity. Well, of course, you can always head over to the Ganges, you know, with a loincloth and a turban, and you'll do well there. I mean, the world has got its ways of checking out. Now it's virtual reality, push button stuff.
Yep, exactly.
You know, so it's not that we don't have millions of escapes, but does anybody explain them? Why they're so attractive to so many people? We're explaining it now, but let's go on.
Quoting Carl Goldberg in his book The Evil We Do, the sadistic type. I was fully aware from my clinical experience with clients who had committed serious violent acts that a lack of regret for their behavior was bonded to their severe early psychological trauma. Exploration of their histories revealed that each of the offenders I treated became violent to inure against some great suffering.
Oh, wow. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And that great suffering is they're in reality. They were forced up into the solar world. They'd much prefer to regress. And most of them actually do. So they're inhabiting this world in a state of extreme discomfort. And so their behavior has to be understood in regards to that, to inure against some great pain, some great form of suffering. And that suffering is basal. It's a suffering of having to evolve into the, you know, reality principle, as Freud called it, out of the pleasure principle, out of the, you know, into a place of delayed gratification, into a place of false identifications with horrible, horrible people, into years and years of having to tolerate this fucking adultism that, as we saw in the earlier slides, is just totally irrational. What the hell is going on? Why are these people this way? Why are they treating me this way? I have no idea. Can't understand it. I don't even know that it's different until I go to school and meet other people who are having a cool life. And then I'm wondering, what happened to me? Why are my parents the way they are? You see? But by then, look, the damage is already done. And then you just end up slinking around like a malcontent or a discontent. And your 2 options then are to fall either into the masochistic typology or the sadistic, or look, a mixture of both, till you don't even know who you are. You don't know if you're coming or going, which is where most people are at today. Let's go on.
Here we have Arno Gruen on the masochistic type. Children cannot live with the awareness that their needs and perceptions are rejected or denied unless their psychic structure is so altered that as a result they are able to deny their true needs. To deny their inner needs, children must either completely or partially split them off. This dissociation involves a basic shift. In order not to be forced to perceive that father and mother are causing them pain, children will search themselves for the cause of their despair. This tragedy, which leads to children's surrender of self, consists not only in the dissociation of their inner world, but, beyond that, in the fact that, in order to maintain the life-giving bond between mother and father, they must see the lack of parental love as the result of a defect in themselves. As a result, they will shoulder the supposed guilt for the lack of love they sense and will begin a life of dreams and fantasies that fuel the need for power in order to overcome their fault.
See, the masquerade continues. This is the contract you make with yourself, how you become inwardly divorced from your own center, and how you fall prey then to the voice of the superego, which is nothing more than the crowd in your head, starting with the parents. Their voices are, you give up your voice. You never even get to hear that, right? Before you've already imported, because it's done, repression is just a synonym for oppression. There's something in the world that oppresses your psyche. So, and we don't know it. It's imported by the superego. You've got to find a reason, because inwardly your soul knows you're being mistreated. There's a surveilling observer, let's call it that, the hidden observer. It's your conscience that even without comparison, with other kids, knows that you're being violated. But you have to use the word know, in this other more unformed, intuitive sort of way. But it's enough for you to know that there's something wrong. You don't know what it is, though. You can't bring it to the reason yet. And this is how the parents then make hay. They love this fact that you're innocent in every conceivable way. And they don't mind the little trajectory that your brain, or the brain of the infant is going to go on to try and work out why these ghastly people do what they do, why there may be want, why I may not be being fed correctly, why other kids have everything, when I look out into the street and I have nothing here. This place is dirty. I'm unloved. They're always in a bad fucking mood. Or they're always pampering somebody else, not me. All of the nine, all of it. All of the horrors, right? So the child then turns in, as he's saying, and thinks there must be something really, really desperately off in me, in myself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the beginning of the self-loathing. It's a cocktail. Yeah, there's the anxieties we talked about. Yeah, there's the rage that comes out of it. And then there's this cache of self-loathing as well. All developing, through the earliest years of life. It's really something, But what's happening is the berating, hectoring voice, which is, of course, the superego, is making hay out of this. And it's all to do with dissociation. It's more taboo to focus on the actual culprit, which is rational. So you have to then dissociate. And this is where self-loathing or the masochism begins. You start blaming yourself. And you start looking into your own being for this and that imperfection. And many of the childhood tics that people have, especially nail biting and a lot of other things, come out of this idea that's forming that you are really loathsome in yourself. Once you cultivate that, so then maybe even gaining weight or other things, having a kind of a unappealing appearance, not taking care of your hygiene, for instance, all of these. So I'm not worth it anyway. That's for other people. I'm going to present myself as a waster. I'm going to be lazy and unkempt. And you see children like this. It's because they have no self-worth whatsoever. It's been drained out of them, but let's go on.
Children begin to hate everything in themselves that could bring them into conflict with parental expectations. Usually, children submit in order to partake of the power oppressing them. Out of this self-hatred grows a readiness for ever more submission. Arnold Gruen.
Yeah, the masochistic type. You did mention in identification there as well, but yeah, it's the masochistic type. Let's go on.
The destructive personality begins in childhood as a state of extreme vulnerability to mistreatment by early caretakers, proceeds to feelings of impacted self-hatred, and then to self-protection by an indifference to other people, followed by attempts to feel better about oneself by acting as if one is a superior person, and finally to a transformation of the shamed person's self-contemptuous personality to that of a perpetrator of outrage against others in order to demonstrate one's superiority. Carl Goldberg, The Evil We Do.
Yeah. So the compensation, right? You get the dissociation, you get the sublimation, and then you get the compensation. These are the classic anatomy of a psyche. There's a flip-flopping. A masochistic type of person can sometimes go through a period where they are quite sadistic, not to human beings, but maybe to an animal. Maybe a boy who goes around plucking the leaves off trees, and off bushes habitually. They're spitting all the time. All these tics that we were talking about. It doesn't have to be the classic, punch-ups. What do you think alcoholism is? What do you think drug use is? What do you think body piercing is? What do you think tattooing is?
Yeah.
The whole thing is a masquerade. And we're testing the waters. A child is going through different phases because it's all, which one is going to work for me? Which one lowers the anxiety the most? Is it the masochistic posture? I'll go and try that. You see, I'm gonna try that. But if it doesn't work, maybe then I'll recast myself, as the sadistic type. Yeah, I like that much better. Because I find out there's always, in my class, weaker people than me, or in my school. And I can push them around, and I can steal their lunch, and I can steal their money. And I can give them bruises and make their life a fucking misery. And I will. And then this can happen on the cultural level. Everything we're talking about can manifest in wars, battles, feuds, gangland, behavior, psychopathic behavior. You used to go watch the movie Fury by Fritz Lang, the classic in this, exposing what we're talking about, where completely super normal people go on to commit atrocities. They'll burn your witches for you. Where's it all coming from? And that can manifest occasionally in great heroic acts, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's just ordinary, nondescript people committing atrocities, like, at the time of Nazi Germany or what have you. But let's go on.
This slide contains some observations from you, Michael. Rage is at the source of this suffering. One is consumed with self-loathing for one's natural organic weakness in the face of an imposing parent. This rage is instrumental to ego formation. Both the ego ideal and superego emerge as coping mechanisms for it. The anxiety, although reduced, never completely subsides. It continues to deform one's character and conditions one's identifications. However, the primary victim is always the self.
Yeah. I think we've talked about that before, the free-floating anxiety that isn't quite bleached by the superego. There'll always be a little extra left over. It's different for different people, though. Some people have a lot of it, right, because the superego isn't functioning that well. Just think of it like a gasket. And in other people, it's solid, it's tight. So the free-floating anxiety is going to be much less. But in any case, because there is going to be this little leftover, the surplus, and then this is coming at a time about you're 7 years of old, when you're turning really to face reality with all of its pressures. Oh my God. Right? You're already predisposed. You have this latent anxiety within you, and then you've got the deal. Like, take the typical teenager who's not got the deal with his sexuality, his blossoming sexuality, or handling going out there to get a girlfriend, and all the competitiveness the challenges of that, and then later on maybe working, the pressures of work and the job and career and family, and my God, that's hard enough. But it matters before how much of this earlier latent anxiety from the childhood period, right, from the infantile position, the function of the superego matters a great deal. So people who don't make it are probably people who've had the cache of this primary anxiety is too much.
Mm-hmm.
And the superego function just simply didn't canalize it enough.
Yeah.
Whereas the guy who's more buoyant and a little bit more, adjusted, yeah, maybe his superego works really, really well. And it was able to, he turned to the world with a great deal of efficacy. And then, it's easier for them to deal then with the challenges because they're not handicapped, they're not hamstrung by this earlier infantile forms of anxiety. This is how much it matters to your success in life. The things that the people who write those books, these Anthony Robbins types, never mention. Their only solution is pump it, pump it, pump it.
Walk on some hot coals and burn your feet. That'll fix it.
Oh, yeah. All the nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But it's all cleverly done.
Mm-hmm.
But the primary things, anyone who studied the New Age or these types will finally, hopefully, come to understand this. They're not telling you the 101s. They're jumping in at a different position because in America particularly, you're not meant to look at childhood, like these earlier slides are saying. Right? That's off limits.
Yeah.
Fuck, we're into gentle parenting now. That's what we get as the result of the ignorance and the neglect of these subjects. The only people who picked any of this up were feminists, but they were working on the Communist Manifesto. They picked the subject all right, but do you think I'm endorsing them or do you think I'm one of them? Do you think I fell for that chicanery? No, because I know that they are only using it as Herbert Marcuse is using it,
Mm-hmm.
as Harold Lasky is using it, as Gramsci is using it. I love the subject, but I'm not going to be fooled to think, oh, I've got to align myself with those characters. I know why they're using it. The hidden script is from the Frankfurt School. I'm able to separate the two. But you know how much backlash I've got in this movement?
Yeah.
Because they think that anyone who is into psychology must be a communist, must be evil. These Christian lunatics that fill this movement think that because you're into psychology, they automatically think you're one of these pluralists or feminists or globalists. Because they're about as twisted and stupid, right? Low IQ people waving the cross in your face. No idea that this subject was bloody hijacked by the left. It's just incredible. But let's go on.
Christopher Lasch on Melanie Klein. Klein discovered that early feelings of overpowering rage, directed especially against the mother and secondarily against the internalized image of the mother as a ravenous monster, make it impossible for the child to synthesize good and bad parental images. In his fear of aggression from the bad parents, projections of his own rage, he idealizes the good parents who will come to the rescue.
Right. This is the clash between the superego and the ego ideal. Even they're part of the same structure, they can work at loggerheads. And even the ego ideal, which scans for heroes, and as he said, tries to project a more heroic figures within. It's a very necessary thing. We've talked about that endlessly. But the ego ideal can go wrong as well. We're not going to talk about that here. Maybe we'll leave that for another show where, we'll point out that, look, all of these structures, all of these mechanisms of consciousness have a dark side. We've been focusing mostly on, the superego's aberrancy. But don't forget that this ego ideal can also end up being a problem.
Mm.
One gets into it. It's not relevant right now to what we're talking about. But what Lasch is talking about there really boils down to this, that the ego ideal is one of the only solutions to this problem. And its coping mechanism of the ego ideal is to scan for better heroic figures, out there. Or at least to take that which you see in the parent occasionally that might be some sort of heroic disposition. It's very rare, but it can happen. And then blow that up. Just one, because you're so hungry for it. That if you see some heroic disposition in mom or dad once in your life, where you're about to be bitten by a dog in the street and daddy rushed to your aid or something like that, you'll remember that. Or her some moment of heroism. You will literally start worshiping at that altar. It's so bad, to try and compensate for what the superego has done, which is, of course, to import the imagos. But always, always, always remember that the superego does not import one-to-one. It magnifies the hectoring voices of the parents. Without this, none of anything we've ever talked about matters. It all hinges on the superego, yes, but this one particular foible is the most important, and it's the most abused. You'll never find anyone in psychology that mentions it. They always skip over this, yet it's right there. There's a magnification, an amplification of the hectoring voices of the parent. It's not one-to-one. And this explains why people who think they've been raised well, and the parent is looking through the family album going, well, we treated him just fine. We don't know why. It turned out to be Jeffrey Dahmer's like out there eating people. But if they'd read their Freud properly, and if their psychologists had read Freud properly, they'd know why. It's not a one-to-one importation. If it was, we wouldn't have pathology, anything like it. We would have a totally different world in which conversation like this would never happen. You wouldn't even have big pharma. The whole world would be transformed on this one principle if it was a one-to-one import. Because then even really, really rotten parents wouldn't cause the states of pathology that we're trying to illustrate. Wouldn't. It'd be bad, but it wouldn't be pathological in this extraordinary way. You know, to distort life, to drive it into the depths of pain that no philosopher can explain. The surfeit of suffering in our planet far overwhelms any nonsense of a survival instinct, and we're just here to survive, and we're just material beings getting along. Look, you can destroy that in seconds with the question of suffering that far, 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 far exceeds any man's, instinct for survival. And yet we have to endure it through this creation. And the fools don't see the differential. They do not reckon on this. And how it explodes their stupid infantile theories. But it all hinges on this amplification. The human mind amplifies. And this is the danger. So whether you have bad parents or not so bad, it doesn't matter. Their voices of prohibition are amplified. And it's the inner tyrant then that now becomes, the inner imago that becomes the problem. So when you see entire civilizations falling in lockstep with a fucking Hitler or an Obama, or a Maduro or any of this nonsense, Mussolini, this is where you have to look. This is why the voices of these fucking Saurons or these Sarumans, end up being so powerful to lead people astray. There's a reason for it, but let's go on.
I have never known a schizophrenic who could say he was loved. R.D. Lang.
Yeah, it's right from the horse's mouth. This man spent his life in the back wards of mental institutions. Right? He knew what he was talking about. Let's go on.
Most children play a masquerade from the early years after they realize that the expression of their uniqueness is not something desired by the parents. Arno Gruen, Betrayal of the Self.
That's right. Yeah, that becomes the most buried thing of all. So when heroic figures, for instance, are not being put in front of a young child, you're already onto a bad trajectory. It's really that crucial. So even if the parents aren't particularly heroic in themselves, they can do wonders by making sure that healthy heroic figures, are placed in front of the child on a regular basis. It's really not that difficult. Hopefully you've got heroic figures in the family, but if you don't, they can breed, can't they? Right. Well, then they can do the next best thing. And there's a really good chance then that when you properly develop and the ego ideal becomes mature in exactly this way, the power of the superego is much, it's lessened. Sorry, it's lessened. It's not as strong. It'll always be there. It'll always be adjusting you to the abnormal society. But there's another voice, another disposition, which can come to the rescue. Okay, so now the next ones are on homosexuality. Let's read those, please.
What we know as homosexuality can be regarded in just this way, as a masquerade. Homosexuality is clearly an acting out of either a sadistic or masochistic type, one divorced from authentic selfhood and victimized by infantile trauma. It is a manifestation of a syndrome defined as the identification with the object of one's hate.
Yeah, there's that identification coming back. And we'll have to break that down over the next few slides. Can you read on?
The father figure is regarded as either an ally of the terrible mother or as one who represents a refuge from her tyrannous power. If a father figure does not exist, it is more likely that a child remains under his mother's thrall. His or her sexuality is bound to be deformed.
Right. So the role of the mother is dominant, as we said, during the bisexual earliest semiotic stages. So there's going to be a massive identification with the female in that regard. So she has primacy. Mm. Now, when the father figure does appear, if he's a kind of a feminized, docile body, then obviously the child is going to see him mostly as a servile agent of the female will. And this will affect the masculinity of a growing boy. And a girl, by the way. We're talking masculinity is a typology. So it will show up in this deficit for both girls and boys. Where's the masculinity? And if the masculinity is not found in a male figure, but only in a dominating mother, do you see how already typology has been screwed up? You see, and since the child is scanning the parent's world to embody imagos, right? That's what it's doing. It's sending out an antenna. Its antenna is picking up all of these messages. That means then from the start, it can't possibly get its typology correct. How's it going to get its sexuality straight if the typologies are all tied up in knots? Let's go on.
As infants, gay males are revulsed by what appears to be their castrated mother, thereafter considering her a victim. Consequently, they strongly identify with her and her ways. They fawn on women and learn to see through their eyes. They quickly learn to regard the male and the masculine as something abject. History proves this to be the case. Male homosexuality increases as more and more women proclaim themselves victims of male violence and oppression.
That's right. This is really, really crucial. 2 slides there. The identification with the woman, because she seems to be the wounded one. And if older women, the mothers, are always complaining about the male in their life, this will only add to the fuel to the fire of that. And this will then help the identifications. The child, boy or girl, but especially girl, is going to try and identify. But the homosexual man is in this position too. He'll think that my mother's been wounded and I must jump in there and protect her. So it's already irrational because the woman hasn't been wounded. The mother has not been wounded. But if the mother's the kind of person who subliminally knows what's going on and sort of demonizes and castrates her own husband in the eyes of the child, she is the castrator, actually. But the child doesn't see that, nor does the child know that nature has ordained women to be this way. There's no such point as castration. There's no wound at all. Look how it's all set up. And the undereducated, maladjusted family unit that doesn't explain all of this causes all of this pathological reactivity and, the ignorance. But then out of that ignorance comes the identifications. but they're not wholesome identifications. They have this monstrous quality. Remember a few slides ago, we talked about the kid with the dreams of his mother being a monster. This is in the literature over and over again. She's the abjected one. Abject means the horrific one. But the male, right, when you don't know what's been going on, the male, the classic Freudian way was to look at the male figure, the father figure, as the main castrator. And if you take that up, then it obviously is a wound. It is an act of punishment. And when one child, the infant mind, sees that the mother has been punished for something, it identifies. It identifies. Both the girl and the boy will identify with the mother. And already the masculine world is completely fucking innocent, hasn't done anything wrong, is going to be seen as the malignant power, and this then can upset, obviously, then a person's sexuality can hinge upon this identification. Let's go on.
The lesbian type has glorified all that is female and feminine to cope with her underlying matrophobia. Fears and hostilities are more likely to be projected on the father figure and male. In many cases, since a young girl is not petrified by castration fear, she remains strongly bonded to her mother, having far less revulsion toward her. The butch type is merely a terrible woman, similar to a terrible mother, but without a desire to breed. Matrophobia in parentheses.
Yeah, obviously, the girl who hasn't got the male member to be lost, it just doesn't have the panic, the subconscious panic that the little boy has. Right? So there's less anxiety in the girl, less castration fear. It's there's an observation, but the boy is soaked in, one, trying to be there for his mother, right? Trying to be a protector against some malevolent force that he really ends up, coming to identify with the male world. But the girl has not been castrated, doesn't have a member to lose, so is luckily freed from this level of anxiety. Now, there could be something positive about that or something negative, but we're looking right now at the aberrant part of it, leading to lesbianism or homosexuality. But the girl is still going to be identified more with her mother in the cases like this. And this could be then one of the causes of lesbianism. Let's go on.
Most lesbians are put off and even intimidated by the butch type of lesbian, whose femininity is far less developed. This is because they are classic discontents who feel they need to harden their persona in order to function in a fundamentally oppressive environment.
Right. Right. So these are the discontents we mentioned earlier, and this type can be understood exactly as that. Also feeling that they've been forced to leave the womb, the safe space, and enter into a completely hostile and foreign solar world full of things they don't like. They become more armored. They take on what looks like a pseudo malehood. I wouldn't even call it masculinity. That would be very wrong. But we're dealing with a mixture of typology and sexuality, which gets confused. So by looking the way they do and coming across as extremely aggressive and armored, this betrays what's really going on. But then they're lesbians. So this makes it very confusing for people, right? Because you think, oh, the lesbian's really, really feminized. Well, how come these girls look so unfeminized? If you get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as I said, this is the confusion between the typology and the sexuality. And you'll never explain it. So there's a major identification with the feminine all the way. And then that makes a hostility toward the perceived castrator. But now that you've got to enter his world, and leave this lunar abyss, one of the classic defense mechanisms is to harden your persona. It's really not rocket science. Let's go on.
If the daughter is distressed by discovering that she is, to her mother, a disappointment, and that her mother preferred a boy, she will in turn develop matrophobia, that is, hatred of her mother. She will prefer the male world, the father, and all that the male world stands for. If a daughter realizes that she is the object of deep-set envy and that her mother secretly competes with her, her hostility toward the latter will compel her toward all things male and masculine. However, she will still be plagued by matrophobia.
Right. So the butch lesbian can also be responding to her mother's envy, but also her mother's original distaste. The mother may have wanted a boy in the first place and didn't get one. And the girl then has realized this. So they're completely confused in their sexuality. Right? Their outward persona is boy-like, and this is what you get when you have a tomboy. Forget about lesbians, right? Butch lesbians. Think about what a tomboy is. There's a superficial, often temporary, alignment with the male or the father's world to escape the mother's disappointment and disapproval. You go because you respond to it by saying, "Well, then, fuck you. You know, I don't want anything of your world because every time I come near to your world, I get this energy of disapproval. So I'll just simply stay away from it," which is a very healthy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the adjusted girl, right, becomes more attracted to the male world. But unfortunately, the butch lesbian, right, who's not attracted to the male world for all the reasons we just explained, now develops a masculine or sorry, a male persona. But the reason why that is to pick up on the psyche of the mother who didn't want a girl in the first place. But because it's mixed, right, this feeling of disappointment then becomes the origin of a sort of a matrophobia, which is really a response to the mother's condition in the first place, her hatred of you, and then maybe even her envy of you. Say you're a beautiful girl. This can affect lots of different women. If a girl picks up that her mother's envious of her beauty and her talent, you'll be repulsed by that. You want nothing to do with it. You'll find it repulsive, as it bloody well is. Because envy is not a positive thing. Especially when it's envy of something virtuous like beauty. And these envious mothers are a bloody plague, by the way. We don't have time to stop and dwell on it, but they're a plague. As pretty girls will find out when they, start dating men. Just watch what happens when it's a really aberrant situation. Just watch what happens in the relationships with their mothers. It's really frightful. Or even when the young girl goes on to even birth a child. And now we've got grandmother stepping in. Somebody who's bloody hated you all your life for your beauty. You see, as we talked earlier about the generational thing?
Yep.
And these stupid women who do this, these give birth to their child, don't keep these monsters away. They don't keep the crone away. They don't say, "You're coming nowhere near. I'm going to have this child in private. Stay the fuck away because I know you're rotten." No, they let them in.
Yep.
We mentioned this earlier. They let the bloody people in. Trying to appease. Trying to say, "Hey, look, I birthed you a child. Aren't you happy now? Aren't you a grandmother? So I'll let your toxic ass back into my life." Ah, why do we do it? But let's go on.
Here we have some images of Rollo May and Heidegger, and an observation from you, Michael. These syndromes are themselves overlaid upon others, such as infantile fear and rage. There is also the problematic function of the superego which, in order to lower anxiety, has us identify with the object of our hate. Modern psychiatry's focus is to aid and abet the superego's mandate, which seeks to adjust us to an anormal world. Existentialists warned that this was no solution at all.
Right. There's pictures of the two there. Well, that we've talked about that before. But the point here is that this coping mechanism of identification is probably one of the main, not the only, but the main cause of homosexuality. Both the boy and the girl are identifying with the mother for different reasons. And these reasons are totally false for the most part, because the mother hasn't been castrated. She hasn't been abused. She hasn't committed any crime for which there's a punishment that would make the male identify with her against the masculine world.
Mm.
But even that wouldn't make him homosexual necessarily. He has to be in the presence of a mother who's continually berating the masculine world, the male world, during the period of infancy, exploiting the fact that the boy is identifying with her. You see how it works? It's a very conscious, active thing.
Yep.
There's a crime being committed here. And so in both cases, there's repulsion attraction. The girl doesn't have the anxiety over the threat of castration, but she can have a mother who's telling her to abuse sexuality. Or she may be picking up on something that either adjusts her correctly to the male world, we've said that, right? Just wanting to get away from the Medusan, Gorgon mother, and her envy or jealousy or condemnation.
Hmm.
Or the identification may just remain. I've no reason to abandon you. You and I, the young daughter and mother, are very similar. So we identify, we continue to identify, and we might do that to such a degree that the male world is then thought of as a complete intrusion. Something aberrant, something abject, in other words. And this then can be the cause of female homosexuality. But it's also the pathology, let's never forget, of matrophobia, which is when a deep animosity towards the mother is created, usually by the mother's actions. The compensation of the superego is to blanket the whole of femininity, the whole of the female world, sorry, with this blanket of glorification. Because dealing with the matrophobia is the number one no-no. You see, it's where the mind cannot go, thanks to the superego. So you glorify everything that is feminine, and then obviously this implies that you have to now do the opposite with the male world. It's got to be demonized. This is the way it is. There's no other way for it to be. And if the mother does not correct it, this is what then the superego orientation will be. So the female lesbian, it's not really that they love the female world at all, or that they are truly feminine. The whole thing is based on a lie. It's a masquerade. Inside an even greater masquerade. That's why we had to put these background slides in the beginning. The whole human race is in a state of pitiful anxiety, acting out. And within it, you get these subcultures who are even more constitutionally and psychologically inferior, who've even got a lesser grasp on what's going on than most others. And they will always talk about genetics or, something, some nonsense, neurology, to cover what's going on.
Yep.
Never looking deeper than that. So the covering of the matrophobia is a twisted logic. Because underneath it all, you're in a state of complete loathing of the feminine and the female. This is the real dynamic that motivates the homosexual woman and most other women as well. These are the massive doses of pathology that must be stripped away if our world is ever to see a moment of sanity. Mm-hmm. But it's not. So this is why the gender wars are going to continue, right? This is why men are just going to break away more and more and more. This is why women are going to become more and more poisoned.
Yep.
Yeah. The trends that we already know are going to continue. It's really, really sad. Because no one is dealing with these underlying issues. In fact, we're even losing the mechanisms of how to deal with it. Psychology is useless. The one that's being purveyed now. And this is because the feminists have beautifully diverted traffic They hijacked the psychology, the subjects of Freudianism and what have you. And they derailed the process, following, as they were told, the Marcusean communistic Fabian agenda. They derailed it from where it should go. So the healthier psychology is very hard to find in the Western world. I've been doing what I can, to bring it forth. So we're not trying to answer the whole of homosexuality here, but these are the key points that need to be brought out.
Yeah, these are things that definitely need to be looked at. I mean, right now in the current culture, the narrative is that if you're gay, you're just born that way, and you
Right.
can't choose it, that there's no choice happening. But, as you're demonstrating here is something that culturally is so taboo that even just bringing it up can trigger people into a vehement denial and even a violent reprisal. And yet no solution will be found unless we look and
Yeah.
question. So this is important information.
Yes, it is. Because I don't think there is a solution to be found.
Hmm.
The one place that we could have looked was to psychology, but when you realize what a fucking mess that's in, because it's been hijacked by the feminists, then you know why I'm so desperate about it and so pessimistic on that level. Now, it's not that individuals cannot pick up on this and help heal themselves, but that's up to the individual. I can do nothing about that. And given the fact that there's many, many more avenues for people to dart down into, like, becoming a Christian again or going towards the Muslim world or the atheistic world, there's hundreds of other ways that people can distance themselves. And tomorrow science will come up with some other shibboleth to explain it away, more like, right? Oh, well, you can guarantee on that because we are in a deeply anti-psychological society. Human beings are not taking responsibility for how they raise children at all. And hopefully in next week's program, we'll also dig into this a little bit more. There's a part 2 to this that I hope to get to, when it comes to sexual aberrations and fetishism and what have you, right? But yeah, these points need, we can only bring up a few points without overwhelming people. And I think these are already. But the sad thing is that, of course, women have not been castrated. Women have not committed any crime that some imperious male figure has come in to castrate them. You see? So this is already a distortion. But families are so stupid that they don't realize that this is what happens in a child. When in the Victorian days, when a woman would bathe and they could see the red blood in the basin, from menstruation, and see what appeared to be a wounded mother, a little boy had no option, but in his imagination ran wild. And
Yeah,
there was an overwhelming feeling of disgust, but also at the same time, this feeling that mother's been wounded. I must take on suffering in myself. And so this created then a pathological identification with the mother and her world, exacerbated by the terrible mother, which is always a big theme here for us. If she herself was always admonishing the male world, don't you see then how this had a detrimental effect on a young boy's mind? So an
absolutely.
identification that he may not have had, not as strong, is now made strong. So he becomes ultra feminized, like a girl already is. But the thing is, nature has ordained it this way. So all his or a girl's hatred towards the male world is all misfounded. Absolutely incredible. It's all these discontents. I've got it all wrong. Now, for some girls and some boys, the male world is seen as a haven. We've already spoken about that, from this female Stygian world of abuses. Like I said, if the girl thinks that she's been envied by her mother or some other aberrations have taken place, or this just constant berating, Yeah, of course she'll want to go towards all that's male and be thankful for it. You know, or in the cases of a young boy where there's not been any identification with the mother for whatever reason. Yeah, you might see that she's been wounded or castrated, but you still may not identify with her because she's just a horrible person. Then there could be more of an adjustment to the male world in that boy as well. These are more the norms. Okay, we got that. We don't need to explain that. But it is in these family constellations, and it is in these psychosexual levels. So one would say, Michael, then I can tell you that the mother who tells the girl to go out there and abuse her sexuality, well, at least that might be a good thing, because she is going to have to go and move towards the solar world to do that, and will be more adjusted than the horrors you're talking about. You see, so the twisted logic says, so a girl who's going in there, we seem to be able to tolerate them all through the world, is filled with these seductive females. That passes as normal, because in the masquerade, that is normal. It's the Bible wouldn't agree. But hell, we'll agree, because out of all the abnormal patterns, the girl who's a bloody sexual diva, right, and running around abusing sexuality and beauty, we just look right through that. That's considered normal today. She's considered adjusted. Other girls want to be like her. Look at the TikTok OnlyFans generation. That's not seen as a vice. So look how twisted and off-center our societies are. That's a deep vice. That is a danger not to the male world, but to the female world. The female who commits to that kind of life is not a happy person within. Right? They're deeply guilty of what they're doing. They've ruined themselves thanks to mama's advice, mama's encouragement. And they've also abused the archetypes of beauty and sexuality. There's a price to pay for that, because those things are not meant to be abused. Those things are meant to be used for the spiritual and moral uplift of mankind. Thank you very much. But when men are led astray and abused in this way, and women themselves are caught in it, in this coquettishness, in this bloody debauchery, how the hell is that helping people? And none of this is being addressed. It's actually being bankrolled with the generations we've got, and these, red carpet celebs and what have you. You don't know what obscenity is coming next. But let's go on.
Quoting Christopher Lasch, envy of mother's power. Melanie Klein, of all psychoanalysts the most sensitive to the ethical implications of Freudian theory, argued that infants envy the mother's power to give and withhold life and dream of appropriating it for themselves. It is not for nothing that envy ranks among the 7 deadly sins. Indeed, it is unconsciously felt to be the greatest sin of all, according to Klein, because it spoils and harms the good object, which is the source of life.
Yeah, the identification with the object of your hate is just, he's extrapolating that in his own words. There's a natural need to secure one's own psyche this way, because we have the ego ideal that's searching for heroes. We have the surfeit of repulsion towards the mother and a father that then needs to, be sublimated. You can't deal with it. It becomes taboo. So the identification is the coping mechanism for that. And yeah, we just move on from that point. The superego now trains you, imports these beings as heroes when they're not really heroes at all, which is a terrible thing, right? So the bar is set very low. Or in pathological cases where they're clearly not heroes, then you grow up with no heroes. And what this means is that you will have no self-esteem yourself, nothing to look up to, nothing to aim for, and you'll remain in what Adler called the inferior position. You'll never know the glory of overcoming anything. And even if you did overcome something on your own, you've got no parents there that'll ever credit you for it. So in the end, you'll just give up, because you need the affirmations. You need to be acknowledged, encouraged. And if you're not, then you'll just give up the heroic life and remain inferior and hate yourself for it. And you'll then envy those other children around you, who seem to be achievers. And this can end up in delinquency. Terrible delinquency. Terrible animosity toward the world. And it can also lead, to identification with criminal types. So instead of, importing positive archetypes, positive imagos, you start identifying with transgressive, delinquent types. That's why the prisons are filled up.
Makes me think of the Joker archetype from Batman. He's so popular, especially when they've made him more sympathetic in the more recent movies with Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm.
And it's happened a lot. We've got P. Diddy and people like that as our heroes now, right?
Mm.
Gun-toting gangsters, right? This is how it's worked. Because nobody's ever told you that this is what the mind does. The ego ideal has its negatives as well. Maybe one day we'll talk about that when it goes wrong. Something, that's honed and something that is the essence of the spiritual within you can easily be overcome. And these Frankfurt School people have worked on that, to do exactly that, to subvert our psyches. And the media is the culprit. Not just the parents, right, in their inability to put heroic figures in front of you, but the whole media. It's not putting the heroic, it used to. That's one of the really good benefits of the past, is I think it did. Children had a good chance of turning on the TV and seeing heroic characters. Where good always overcomes evil and things like that. And you had a chance of identifying with that, Think of the Star Wars franchise and many others, right? Many others. The Clint Eastwood films or whatever, right? There's definitely been there. But it's got less and less and less. Down through the 80s and 90s, it became more and more subverted.
Yep.
In clever ways. Again, the planks of the communist, the culture, this would be the cultural Marxists who got unleashed. They weren't as strong in the 70s and 80s. Also, they hadn't perfected the manner in which they were doing it, targeting women, targeting young girls, right? It wasn't quite as perfected, but they quickly learned. And when the wall came down, you can, use that as a marker if you want, loosely.
Mm-hmm.
Because now the cultural Marxist thing could be bankrolled much more, I think. And so from the early 90s, and of course, this is when we had the advent of the internet, the computer, so a lot of things were coming online that aided and abetted this. But let's go on. There's a few final slides, is there?
Yes, we have one left.
Okay.
Mother and child. If little boys feel that they cannot separate from their mother, perhaps this is caused by the way some women succeed in making their sons overly attached to them. Direct seductiveness produces the same result as unattainability. In both cases, the child learns that what matters most is to possess the other person. Arno Gruen.
There you go. So again, this is more of a conscious, incestuous seductiveness of a mother to her male child. We may get the chance to talk a little bit more about that, because the expert on that, who wrote many volumes on this, was Alice Miller. So we'll have to leave it there for now, because that would take us off on a tangent. But hopefully we can visit that.
Yeah, I'd like that. That one sounds very compelling.
Sure. That's why we have to do things slowly, gradually, so that these things can be consolidated. Because in our present, environment, we just pick up things and drop them. It's like the internet. You're on to the next thing so fast that there's no longer any consolidation.
Yeah.
And that won't work with these ideas. One has to really take it slowly, sometimes recapitulate, and back up, like what we're doing with these slides, to let people know what's in the literature, where are we at, so they can be brought up to speed. And some of the things for a lot of listeners will be very taboo. We already know that. And and maybe new. And whatever is new can be quite threatening, as you said earlier, triggering. It's just because it's new. It's because our minds don't normally think in these terms. And don't forget that we're so conditioned by the media, who's doing its best to make sure that what we're talking about is never brought to the fore. No, not absolutely no way. So sadly, when you're talking to people about this, so like the question of homosexuality, for instance, they just can't think with you.
Yeah.
Because they've been so conditioned. And it becomes impossible for them to be open to anything different, without study. And as I say, it's not their fault. The feminists are the ones who hijacked the psychology and the Freudianism, and they were allowed to run rampant, remixing it in all sorts of aberrant ways, throwing out what they didn't want, and highlighting things that served their nefarious agenda. So this is why it is also conspiratorial. So if you're waiting for normal psychologists to do the right thing, you won't, because none of those people believe in any conspiratorial action. What fucking use is it? I've studied them all, right? You've really got to pick and choose. It's nigh on impossible to get the full story from a psychologist today, a writer, even if they're quite eminent and even if they're really, really well-meaning. That's why I don't mind going, to the left, to the right, to the anti-psychologist, to the guys in the middle. I'm pulling from all different places. Because there's a dearth. It's not as advanced as people think. Most of these academic intellectual things are not as advanced as we think. And many of them have gone through major paradigm shifts as well. Just when they thought, from inside, oh, we've nailed it. Suddenly, boom, the house of cards collapses. They don't let you know that. They turn the cameras off and go, shit, what are we going to do now? And the paradigm has been exploded already. But they don't want the public to know that. They want to keep the lights burning and make you think that, oh, it's just, everything's just fine. But we know that classical physics is in the toilet. We know that. Right? With the advent of quantum science and other things. And it's the same across the board. These things like neurology and all have been burning for years. But these bastards want to keep their jobs. They want to keep the sign on their doors, their parking spaces.
Exactly.
So they've all agreed to pull the wool over people's eyes and get them distracted. They know that there's not an ounce left of any kind of materialistic paradigm. So that's why they just want to talk always about AI. It's the new catchword. Anything to distract from the intellectual vacuum and from the colossal meltdown.
I don't know if you've heard of this, but one of the narratives is just a micro narrative in the hive mind, is AI influencers. So if you're ugly, don't worry, you can just LARP an AI skin over your face. So you can skinwalk an AI and make her hot or make him like hot. And don't worry, even if your voice sucks, we'll use voice modification to make you sound seductive. And then you can pull all these people to you. And to me, like, my point with this is it's like these steps towards transhumanist living in a machine, hooking up to something that is even more artificial than where humanity is culturally, living virtually in a world to escape reality even further. I mean, astrologically, we see that transition, that potential moving. I mean, as Pluto moves from Aquarius into Pisces in the tropical system, so it's it's just the trajectory does in large way in the consensus direction. It just seems to be rushing toward further escape from the reality. So to me, I'm just really grateful that you're on our team, so to speak, to bring this information forward.
Yeah, I think it's very valid also for this social level. Those who know what's going on in the individual psyche, how these mechanisms, like I've explained already, right? Just how important this magnification of this amplification would be a better term, for the voices, the prohibitive voices. This is the sad thing. It's not the permissive voices that are amplified, you see? It's the hectoring. And that's why good parents, what would be called good parents, are sometimes absolutely at a loss to explain why they've given rise to really, rotten fruit, rotten offspring.
Yeah.
It is a problem. And they look back at their own lives and how they treated that child and say, look, we just don't understand what we did wrong. And we even have other children that turned out really, really well. Why this one delinquent who's been a problem child, a nasty little so-and-so from very early on. And they're left aghast, and it can really hurt. It can really, destroy life. When parents can't fathom how they could give birth to 3 excellent children who grew up normal and adjusted, and 1 absolute delinquent. How do we explain that? It's more rampant than you know. So even from the parental side, I'm no big fan of adultism or parenting, but I still have enough logic to know that this is a problem. And you can sometimes, feel for these parents. But then they haven't read their R.D. Langs, and they haven't read their Alice Millers. They have no clue, no orientation whatsoever. And yet we've had decades of feminism, and they haven't even explained the basics. Look, our first slide today, right? But, the injections into the very womb itself, what an intrusion that is to a little fetus.
Yeah.
Now it's dozens of injections, both before and after birth.
Yeah.
And we're oblivious. Then there's the mother's autolog. And as I said, the whole nightmare list, the generational problem. And maybe a woman is giving birth for all these wrong reasons. We just explained it earlier on today. And there's other reasons why there can be a problem too. Is it a toy? Is it a crutch that she's giving birth to? Is it a way of punishing that child for her own suffering? But most importantly is the idea of castration, which when properly unpacked is not just so simple as saying the threat of a physical, wounding. It's a sequential state where organic psychosexual stages of development are arrested, particularly the phallic. Because the mother doesn't want to see the child, the male child, graduate. The phallic, you see, means moving more into the solar world, where it comes under the dominion of the father's world, the solar world. So there's a massive, massive conflict within a mother at that time. And even before, when her mind can start getting all confused. And there can be inflation. And there can be egomania. I'm the giver of all life. But then there's expressions to a young infant of the feeling of no, I'm also the bringer of death and destructiveness. I can suffocate. I can smother. I can withhold affection and attention. There's all this cocktail long before the father even comes on board. So some people got in there and said, Freud, we don't think you've quite got it right. You're starting a little bit too late. Your Oedipus stages should be, pushed back a bit. Talk more about the dominion of the female. Well, he really didn't. It took others like Otto Rank and others down the line, to do so. But the feminists made sure that they didn't want to talk about it at all because of all the things we're talking about. The dark side of the female psyche would be more something that then came to bear, and they didn't want that.
Well, I just think about how things would have been so different and much more healthy if this was brought up. I mean, I know it can, as a woman myself, like I know this can be painful. I know this myself. I've been called out many times throughout this series on things that are valid that I've experienced, that I've done. And it hurts to realize, wait a second, you mean I'm the bad guy? I'm actually the villain here? And when you realize that, yeah, it can hurt a lot. But the thing is that a piece of knowing that and going through that pain means that we can actually reconcile the reality. Yeah, it can hurt, but would we rather avoid the pain and live in a delusion. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me multi-generationally. I get what you're saying, though, in the sense that a lot of people may not even be thinking at that level, at the conscious level, because from my own personal work and the kind of work that I do, the angle I take towards this, of course, it's not as eminent as yours. I'm still learning a lot of things, but some of the stuff I've noticed is that feelings can be so powerful in the nervous system that they actually cut off the conscious connection, the awareness of what's causing it, long before it even reaches what was that? And then you're acting out with that, like, on impulse, like a bug, kind of. And so, I just say this to say, this can hurt, but us knowing it, the fact that you're bringing this forward, this is really important, because any woman who's being honest with herself, if what Michael has said throughout this series, or even this episode, if you're just watching this one, if you're being honest with yourself and you notice that what he's saying is legit, it's valid, and it's even applicable to yourself or your own dynamic with your mother or her mother's mother, or generationally, or maybe your dynamic with your child, this is something where we can steer that ship away from the iceberg if we really put the effort in, and this will be a generational effort. So we need to look at it from that perspective, in my opinion.
Right. We really do. Because otherwise, also, this media is going to run roughshod over you.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to lead you further and further into falsity. Especially when it comes to things like transsexualism, homosexuality. Hey, there's no two genders. It's all a big mix. All this gender dysphoria that's being pumped. I mean, surely people must know that it's just nothing but lies.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really super blatant lies. And the fact that it's being pushed should tell a sane person they're fucking desperate, that they should go against biology and science so much, so egregiously, should tell anyone that only desperate people who are at the end of their tether, that they're at the end of their manifesto, would go to this length. See? These cultural Marxists have got to pull this out. It's so against nature. It's so against what we know in science about gender and sexuality. Yet the world is falling for it because of just the drip feed, the drip feed, the drip feed. And also because of the editing, where the things we're talking about are never brought to the fore, ever, by anyone. Femi men, right, the homosexual man, doesn't go with ordinary males. They go with feminine men just like themselves. That's called feminization, right? They're leaning towards the feminine. What does that tell anybody? Nothing.
Oh, I have a question about that, actually. What about, like, the whole dominant, we could just say, like, the stereotype of, like, the leather wearing, hyper aggressive male homosexual? Would you consider them still feminized too? I'm curious what your
Yes.
perspective is. Yeah, okay.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
a masquerade. That's a third masquerade now.
Okay.
We've had nestled masquerades from what we call normality to
Yeah.
the abnormal, and then within the abnormal, you'll have nothing but another nested bunch of masquerades.
Mm.
Yeah, the Harley Davidson riding, butch gay guy. It's a big cocktail. It's a big mixture.
Mm.
He's still highly chivalric and highly feminized.
Mm. Oh,
But he's
chivalric. Oh, sorry, Michael, please. Yeah. Yeah.
well, he's parodying the male.
Mm.
Remember, masculine is the typology, male is a sexual state.
Right.
You can alternate between the two. You can pose and be parodying of a male. Why? Is because in the past you couldn't be openly homosexual, not at all. Right? It's only in the most recent period that you could be one of these femi men and get away with it in public without being kicked to the curb. So the homosexual man of the past, generally speaking, had to habituate, he had to come across as a normal male. He wasn't one, but he had to appear like one. You see how it is?
Mm-hmm.
So the tendency is to just be an ordinary male and conceal. I'm thinking of the times of Oscar Wilde and people like that, right? You could be as homosexual as you wanted, but you couldn't appear to be at all the way they are today.
Mm.
The tendency and the trend for decade after decade, century after century, was to come across in a very sort of masculine, robust male way. Remember, going back to the Greeks. wrestling and all. They're all homosexuals, right? There was a lot of homosexuality in Athens and Greece. But the physical outward persona was exactly as you've been described. Warriors wearing armor, right? Going about wrestling and towel flicking. You see? So these are the acts that you do at each epoch. And that's sort of held over a bit into the group that you're talking about, the S&M type thing.
Mm.
And it's not only that, but it's the homosexuality is there, but it's also mixed with other sadistic and masochistic trends. That's why in this program, I wanted to bring them up together. We opened up with that, knowing that this is exactly it. It's quite a cocktail, which makes it sort of hard to decipher until you're able to break it down in the way that we've done. There's experimentation. There's people that might experiment with homosexuality for a brief period, you see, before they find out, okay, this is not for me. But at least I went and I explored it just to see. Because like during the teenage years, you can be unsure. And there's a much larger group who dabble in homosexuality and then leave it forever than there are those who stay within being a homosexual. There's far more people who've dabbled in it to leave it, knowing that it's not for them, than there are of the other kind, who find that it is for them. Far more. Far, far, far more. But they went through an ambivalent period. And it's perfectly natural. It's perfectly okay, given what we've talked about, the horrors of childhood and adultism. You know, as you're working out your identifications, as your superego's clashing with the ego ideal and vice versa. So men in uniform, right? And then the sado version of that, sadistic version, the masochistic version, right? We're always experimenting, finding our levels, what works for us and what doesn't. And by the way, there's a lot of other syndromes that we haven't even talked about here. You know, the work of Melanie Klein. We could go into that to explain a lot of things that you're talking about. Why the leathers, why the noisy motorcycles, and many other. There are other ways, you know, of approaching this. But I've been editing it, trying to get to the heart of it. And maybe later on, you know, sometime we'll be able to look at it, even bring to bear other incredible insights into why all the human drama is the way it is.
Yeah.
But the main thing is to see that the erotic thing is a masquerade within a masquerade. You know, the whole human race is so far off kilter, hasn't a clue what it's about, what it's doing, where it's going, anything. It's only a very small number of open-minded, enlightened people who've taken these matters seriously enough to look it in the face, you know, and also do the shadow work to spot in your own existence, in your own life, where are these sadistic traits, where are these masochistic traits? You know, when was I masochistic in life? Or when maybe I've been a bit sadistic at times. When did that work for me? When did I go down that road? You know, when did I identify with such and such? And then I changed that identification, and today I'm no longer even concerned with that. How did that happen and why? Or what changes have happened in me through my teenage puberty, you know, period? And how's that changed as I moved up to my Saturn return or got married? And then even after marriage, have I observed myself, the chivalric aspects in myself? Or can I hold my own? Or am I completely in circulation around this female that I'm with? Or have I got an overwhelming instinct of dominance to dominate her? You know, put her into the inferior position and hate myself for doing that? Or do I find out that she likes to be compliant? Something in her life wants me to take control and be the provider? But later on, when we get to the divorce court, I find out that she's been seething with hatred towards that very thing. Now she's going to tell me she was controlled and had no freedom and no me time. But all the way through our marriage, you couldn't get her to make a single decision. What the fuck is going on? See, and I'm saying, why do you have to discover these things at these critical moments?
Mm.
Why does it have to, shouldn't you have been doing that all along? But whatever the norm is, we don't have to accept it. Whatever norm the masses take on is always going to be aberrant. It's never going to be the right thing. Right? But rather than be a cynic of it, be a critic. Stand alone, push back, criticize it, find the holes, train your mind. That's the real science. Try to, go against the flow, not accept whatever's trending. And it doesn't mean you have to get up in people's faces or irritate anyone or violate their sovereignty. Let everybody be the way they want to be, as long as they're not, disaffecting you. It's a circus out there, right? And it always will be.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up a really important point that a lot of people, including myself, have missed, and it is to respect their sovereignty of others. I mean, it's not really something that we can force upon others, this information or just our perspective. So to me, like what you're saying there is really important. I just wonder, I just have a quick question. I know that we're almost at 2 hours, but if you don't mind, you mentioned like homosexuality earlier. You just mentioned the chivalric sort briefly, but I'm just curious, would you also categorize the Dionysian type as suitable to like the male homosexual? I would imagine because they're so soft.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I would, yeah.
Yeah, just curious. Just wanted to confirm. Mhm.
Well, earlier when we talked about that everything we're speaking of
Mhm.
has the historical echo, the component, this is where that comes in. This goes back to the time of the goddess traditions in which the role of males, especially some choice males, was very different than it is today and was very, very androgynous and bisexual, right? Because during this period of alleged matriarchies, the acolyte, the sun lover, was what we would call now very, very feminine.
Mhm.
A flower child is how they've been described. We've done a lot of work on this on Unslaved. A lot of work in my Female Illuminati program and many others as well, especially in the monstrous feminine episodes, So yes, there wouldn't have been anything like the kind of masculinity that became common later on. It wasn't the way the archetype was when the feminine was dominant, as it may be again today. See, what today's homosexuality is more than halfway back, going backwards. The homosexuality today is a return to the atavistic. It's based on atavistic memory of a time when men were castrati, eunuchs. And you and I have talked about this, even the age of chivalry, the age of romance, right? The courtly love nonsense and how recent that was in history and what it portends
Mhm.
as this feminine archetype made a return. Oh, and it only could make a return because it's seated within the psyche of the male, right? The romantic period, the love poets, right? The whole troubadour tradition, all of this. Why it came up again. And it'll come up again. And the modern homosexuality cannot be understood without this. You've got to articulate it, connect it back to an old atavistic memory when man was a sacrificial creature. We've talked about it in our earlier programs. And that Dionysian, if you wish to call it that, memory is still there, and it's quite attractive to certain people because it's, again, the ultimate form of regression back to the magical child thinking level, right? We're all born from woman, so naturally this is going to be awakened. The atavistic memory of being dominated by the threatening, blood-soaked, monstrous goddess is going to be there in every single male child. And then depending on the dynamic that you have with your physical mother, it'll either be exacerbated, which is a terrible thing to happen, or it won't be there at all because she's an evolved type, right? And her autolog and her relationship with you is one of genuine caring. And she's not a terrible mother, and she's not trying to arrest you, and she's not trying to wield her power over you. She's trying to make you into an autonomous being. She's trying to make of you a superior type. She's trying to put heroic imagos in front of you. Right? She's trying to be authoritative, not authoritarian. And most important, she's not blackening the male world in your fucking eyes.
Mm.
Right? She's not doing a hatchet job on daddy. We don't need men, do we? Fucking, is that right? You know, and all the rest of it. All the backbiting, putting a man down instead of building him up, and all the other abuses we've tried to talk about. Never, never, never should that be done. That creates an immediate imbalance. And then added to the other things we've talked about, there can be over-identification with the feminine principle. The negative feminine principle, not the positive. The young daughter gets it when her sexuality is being abused by a mother. That's the negative side of the feminine. And the young male can get it too. When the mother clings to him, you know, like the slide said, clings to him. I've been wounded. You're my protector. You're my hero. What for? Nothing's fucking happened to you. You're an adult. I'm not fucking helping you. I'm not laying my life on the line for you. I'm not chivalric. You can take care of yourself. Well, you think an infant can work all of that out? Right? And this constant attitude from the mother all the way through until you're a teenager. By the time you've arrived in your teens, you're a fucking mess. You're a psychic, emotional mess. Because one part of you is fighting that, but the other side is totally conditioned. You see? And so you break down. You can't go towards the masculine male world with any kind of, robustness or sanity. So you give up and you become this Dionysian type, which makes it much more easy then for you to fall into atavistic patterns, homosexuality or some other debauched sort of pattern, overeating. You're a discontent. We've made it short by saying that, but it's very, very accurate. So what it means is that there's a constant, always kindling antipathy to the masculine world. In one of the slides, we said that the more and more that women have claimed that they're being oppressed, homosexuality has been on the rise. Is anybody going to argue with me about that? Everyone can acknowledge that. The more women claim they're oppressed, the more that men have identified with with the oppressed class, and therefore there's more homosexuality. Look, you can't make it any clearer. So masculinity is coming as a premium. Parodying the male, that's easy. That's part of the masquerade. But genuine masculinity is now, almost becoming a thing of the past. It really is. And this vortex can become so strong, the downward drag, that a point is going to come where we may not be able to even escape it.
Yeah.
Because it's something quite deadly. And it doesn't serve womankind. Right? That's why this is nothing to do with any misogynist posture. The first victim of everything we're talking about is womankind. The New Age, right? These goddess worshippers, they have no idea. You and I have talked about it, right? The dark anima.
Yep.
Which is the ultimate dark mother divine. You wouldn't believe, right? People who just watching us now, go back and look at Unholy Oblation and some of the other ones we've done. You'd be surprised to find out how these feminists have been had. That the very presence that they think they're worshiping is their greatest nemesis. How do you work that out? How can you possibly? You see,
Yeah, well,
But these are the evil ones.
Mm.
These evil ones don't believe in anything transcendent. These feminists are the deepest atheists, right? They're the most unholy fucking things walking on the face of this earth. And in their wake, like black magicians, right? Like sorcerers, in their wake, they create just a wake of poison. And that poison you see in our children, in the teens, right? In all the transgender nonsense. You see, it's just like a vampire's cloak, killing everything that it touches, turning flowers into weeds, polluting the world everywhere they go. That's what you're dealing with. And then we live in that chaos thinking, and nothing's wrong, everything's perfectly normal.
Yeah.
You know, because it's been hypnotism. We've been hypnotized.
Yeah, it's that chthonic realm. The chthonic realm is so labyrinthine, right? That it can really look like there's mirages and illusions all throughout there and glamours. So you can think that you've found some sort of paradise, and it's completely like once you can, the clearing happens, your eyes are cleared, you realize you've been swimming in a cesspit of like almost literal shit. Pardon my language.
No, this is it. We're under a worldwide hex. Ultra feminization. It's not a positive thing. And when you look around the world, that's what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And what it means is that in the end, the real masculine thing will be considered most abnormal. That's what the plans of the cultural Marxists was.
Mm-hmm.
To use women as a doomsday weapon. Yeah. Now there's the signs that they have to, you know, this is their last go round. But never forget that an animal that's wounded is more dangerous.
Exactly.
So yeah, big thanks again to what you're doing, Sarah, for inviting me, letting me, work on get this message out. I think to me, this is just fascinating. There's absolutely nothing controversial about it in my eyes. This is just fascinating. These dynamics.
I agree. The more I listen, the more fascinating it is for me as well. I mean, I'm just the type of person who likes to understand why things are happening. And so as this information comes out, like I said, yeah, it can hurt, but it's, to me personally, I'd rather know the truth 100% of the time, even when it hurts, even if it's excruciating. And it's a real privilege to be able to facilitate your presentations, but also to be able to learn this stuff. And I think that the people who are exposed to these shows are, everyone is greatly fortunate to have exposure to this. So thank you, Michael. I'm really looking forward to our next episode.
Thanks.
Thank you. And with that, we bring this episode of The Dark Side of the Female Psyche to a close. There's still more to come in this series, so make sure you're subscribed to Willfully Evolving Woman here on YouTube and turn on your notifications so that you'll know when the next episode is ready. More social media accounts may be added in due time, so if that interests you, bookmark willfullyevolvingwoman.com and be sure to check back periodically. If you would like to follow Michael and learn more from him, you can find his works through the following channels: dragonmother.org, femalepsychology.org, and of course, michaeltsarion.com. And if you're interested in Michael's premium presentations and the Unslaved podcast, you can find those by becoming a member at unslaved.com or unslaved.substack.com. I'm Sarah DeHaven, and on behalf of Michael and myself, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.